My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American. 188 years ago this week, a small band of valiant men began a long struggle for freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, not only to found a nation, but to forge an ideal of freedom, not only for political independence, but for personal liberty, not only to eliminate foreign rule, but to establish the rule of justice in the affairs of men. That struggle was a turning point in our history. Today, in far corners of distant continents, the ideals of those American patriots still shape the struggles of men who hunger for freedom. This is a proud triumph. Yet those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning. From the Minutemen at Concord to the soldiers in Vietnam, each generation has been equal to that trust. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect our freedom. Americans of every race and color have worked to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now, our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice within our own borders. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hatred how this all happened, but it cannot continue.
President LBJ attracted support and approval from racial minorities when he passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He was a strong advocate of civil rights. Therefore, some historians compare him to presidential civil rights activists like Abraham Lincoln. President LBJ gained tremendous public approval for his actions against racism, shooting his overall approval rating to almost 70%. In addition, according to historian David Coleman, this act was so monumental in the end that it was deemed one of the crowning legislative achievements for the civil rights movement. Although LBJ made significant strides towards black individuality, he made little effort to equalize the Latinos and other racial minorities. This revealed that LBJ's liberal stance towards civil rights was based primarily on gaining political strength, not providing equality, as pointed out by his opposers and other political leftists.
On an April afternoon in the year 1966, I asked a distinguished group of citizens that were interested in human rights to meet me in the cabinet room in the White House. In their presence that afternoon, I signed a message to the Congress. That message called for the enactment, and I quote, of the first effective federal law against discrimination in the sale and the rental of housing in the United States of America. Few in the nation, and the record will show that very few in that room that afternoon, believed that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And now, at long last, this afternoon, its day has come. Now with this bill, the voice of justice speaks again. It proclaims that fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life.
In this video, President Lyndon B. Johnson states that even though citizenship guarantees certain freedoms to all Americans, the civil liberty of fair housing still hadn't been established. The Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination concerning the sale of houses throughout the U.S. Barely passing through the Senate, the Fair Housing Act was passed shortly after Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. Johnson had eventually stated that the bill had gone through a rough path before approval, but now that the civil liberty is established, the voice of justice speaks again. He stated that this bill gave every American citizen the ability to follow the American way of life. The act later became known as the final great legislation of the Civil Rights Act.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. And I urge this Congress and all Americans to join with me in that effort. It will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. But we shall not rest until that war is won. The richest nation on earth can afford to win it. We cannot afford to lose it. $1,000 invested in salvaging an unemployable youth today can return $40,000 or more in his lifetime. Poverty is a national problem requiring improved national organization and support. But this attack, to be effective, must also be organized at the state and the local level and must be supported and directed by state and local efforts. For the war against poverty will not be won here in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House. The program I shall propose will emphasize this cooperative approach to help that 1/5 of all American families with incomes too small to even meet their basic needs. Our chief weapons in a more pinpointed attack will be better schools and better health and better homes and better training and better job opportunities to help more Americans, especially young Americans, escape from squalor and misery and unemployment roles where other citizens help to carry them.
Statistics showed that in 1962, 21% of the population was still under the poverty line. To address this issue, Johnson issued a war on poverty. In his 1964 State of the Union address, LBJ announced, "Our aim is not only to relieve the symptoms of poverty, but to cure it and, above all, to prevent it." Early after taking office in March of 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Economic Opportunity Act. This act created the Office of Economic Opportunity, which was the agency responsible for carrying out Johnson's programs. These programs included the Job Corps, Community Action Program, and VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America. The Job Corps' mission was to help young people between the ages of 16 and 24 improve the quality and satisfaction of their lives through vocational and academic training. Community action agencies were designed to attack poverty through local private and public nonprofit organizations that carried out community action programs. VISTA served as a domestic counterpart to the Peace Corps, consisting of members whose goal was to fight poverty in low-income communities.
President Johnson had sought to protect America's environment similar to past President Teddy Roosevelt and his advisor Gifford Pinchot. Concerned over the pollution in America, LBJ focused on the government's ability to provide money for research on pollution, set standards on waste, and monitor emissions from cars and facilities. However, he also used federal power for the benefit of national parks around the country. Johnson signed over 300 conservation measures into law and established around 50 new national parks and expanded several existing ones. In his remarks upon signing the Air Quality Act, Johnson states that 130 million tons of poison have been released into the air and there will be 40% more automobiles and trucks by 1980. But with this new legislation, Johnson states that we can purify our water, we can clean up our air, and we can give protection to our babies and our old folks.
President LBJ created 3 monumental programs with the goal of improving educational opportunity for America's youth. For the young, he created Head Start, a basis for equal education in elementary schools. As an addition to his War on Poverty campaign, this sector of educational reform provided funding to families with low incomes, providing needy children with early education, nutrition, and parental involvement services. Next in LBJ's plan was to assist those at the high school intermediate level. Many students of this time lived on an 8th grade education or lower due to poverty that persisted in the family. Thus, Upward Bound was created to provide high school students with post-intermediate collegiate educational opportunity. Finally, LBJ's last and most active role in his War on Poverty was his Job Corps program. LBJ sought to improve the quality of life of those aged 16 to 24 with low income. The Job Corps provided vocational and academic training to these young men seeking to enter the job market. In terms of approval, LBJ's War on Poverty centering on educational reform was a moderate success. This political cartoon, titled Too Late, LBJ Has Already Promised Us Everything, was drawn by Charlie Daniel. This cartoon is critiquing how LBJ, through his Great Society legislation, promised everything to the poor. He assured the public that the government would assist with housing, education, poverty, welfare, and even civil rights, assuring so much that there's nothing left for the people to ask for. Charlie Daniel makes a comparison between the powers that LBJ thinks he has, as seen by his promises, to the fictional powers of Santa Claus, as if LBJ himself was trying to be like Santa. In emphasizing that LBJ promised everything, Charlie Daniel insinuates that LBJ won't be able to uphold his vows. Charlie Daniel would be proven correct when we see in the future the futile results of LBJ's legislation. One of the most controversial and debatable topics of Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency was the way he handled the war in Vietnam at home. He inherited the war from John F. Kennedy and promised that he would bring a swift end to it. However, public support waned as he continued to put troops on the ground until 1968. According to historian David Coleman, Lyndon B. Johnson's overall approval ratings reached an all-time low at 51% because people were dissatisfied with the way he was handling things on the home front. Furthermore, President LBJ attracted support and approval from racial minorities when he passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He was a strong advocate of civil rights, therefore some historians have compared him to activists like Abraham Lincoln. According to historian David Coleman, the passage of the Civil Rights Act skyrocketed LBJ's approval to 70%. Moreover, the assassinations of important public figures MLK and RFK stimulated public distress that was poorly handled by President LBJ. The timing of these events contributed largely to their significance. That year, LBJ's mishandling of the war in Vietnam at home aroused public criticism that was intensified with these assassinations. Historian David Coleman states that these events led to the end of LBJ's term because they all happened during the election year, and the nation would label LBJ's name with these events. America's blood would still be boiling.
Historian John Halpin states that most of the reforms that came with the war on poverty, such as Medicare and Medicaid, are still largely relied on today. The way LBJ perceived basic human rights parallels his beliefs on the war on poverty as a continuation of the basic American bargain that all people should be given a decent shot at achieving their life's goals. and securing stable lives built on genuine freedom and economic opportunity. In contrast to LBJ's efforts, John Alpin states that 1/4 to 1/3 of Americans still face direct economic hardships.
Sarah Heisman was in support of the Civil Rights Act, stating that this act was so monumental that it was deemed one of the crowning legislative achievements of the Civil Rights Movement. Although LBJ showed significant support for the oppressed blacks, some historians such as Sarah Heisman argue that he did little to help other minorities, such as Hispanics, because they had little potential for political gain. This caused leftists to point out that President LBJ did not truly believe in racial equality. Rather, he was only supporting the civil rights movement for a stronger political presence. Furthermore, Heisman spoke about educational reform during a time when most students seldom completed 8 years of schooling. Moreover, an even larger amount of students had not finished high school. Sarah Heisman believes that LBJ made a pursuit for a greater society only because he felt like he owed it to Congress and the American people to finish what JFK had started.